Ever thought about a time when a nation declared war on birds? It seems too bizarre to be true, doesn't it? Well, buckle up, because we're about to dive into a strange but real chapter of history where Australia, in all seriousness, declared war on emus. Yes, you heard that right. Emus, the large flightless birds native to Australia. This peculiar conflict, known as the Great Emu War, unfolded in the year 1932. To fully grasp the absurdity of this event, we need to set the stage. Picture Australia during the Great Depression. The economy was in shambles and people were desperate. Amidst this chaos, the Australian farmers, particularly those in Western Australia, were struggling. These farmers, many of whom were World War I veterans, were promised vast tracts of land by the government. They were tasked to increase Australia's wheat production. However, they found themselves in a predicament. The wheat prices were falling drastically. They were unable to make ends meet, and to add to their woes, they were dealing with an unexpected menace: emus. Imagine thousands of emus invading your farmland, destroying everything in their path. This was the reality for Australian farmers in the 1930s. In the heart of the Great Depression, these farmers were struggling to make ends meet, and the last thing they needed was an emu invasion. Emus native to Australia are flightless birds that can stand up to 6 feet tall. They're not typically aggressive, but they are known for their insatiable appetites. Each year, after their breeding season, these birds migrate in search of food. This migration, which usually involves a few hundred birds, was nothing out of the ordinary. But in the year 1932, something extraordinary happened. Thousands of emus, driven by severe drought conditions, migrated towards the Western Australian farmland. These emus descended on the farmland like a storm. They consumed and destroyed everything in their path, leaving a trail of devastation. Farmers watched in despair as their crops, their only source of income, were decimated. The emus, numbering in the thousands, were relentless. It was an invasion, a destructive force that the farmers were powerless to stop. The situation was dire. The farmers, already struggling with the economic hardships of the Great Depression, were now facing an ecological disaster. With their livelihoods at stake, they did the only thing they could do. They turned to their government for help. They petitioned the government, pleading for assistance to combat the emu invasion. They needed help, and they needed it fast. This was no ordinary plea. It was a desperate call for help from a group of people on the brink of losing everything. The farmers needed a solution, a way to stop the emus from destroying their crops, their livelihoods, and their futures. They were at the mercy of these birds, and they needed the government to step in. With crops destroyed and livelihoods at stake, the government had to step in. Armed with machine guns and a mission, the Australian Army was deployed. As the emu population continued to wreak havoc on the country's farmlands, the Australian government knew they had to take action. In the early days of November of 1932, the Army, led by Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery, marched into the Campion region of Western Australia where the emu population was most concentrated. Their strategy was simple: use the element of surprise to their advantage and deploy machine guns to control the emu population. However, as the saying goes, the best-laid plans of mice and men often go awry, and the Australian Army was no exception. From the get-go, they faced numerous challenges. First, there was the sheer number of emus. It's estimated that there were around 20,000 emus in the area, and they were spread out over a vast distance. This made it difficult for the Army to corral them into a single area. Then, there was the terrain. The vast open landscapes of Australia's wheat belt provided little cover for the soldiers, making it difficult for them to get close to the emus without being noticed. To add to this, the emus were surprisingly fast and agile for their size, capable of running at speeds up to 30 miles per hour. But perhaps the greatest challenge was the emus' resilience. Despite the Army's use of machine guns, the emus proved to be incredibly tough. Many were able to withstand several bullets before finally falling, while others seemed to escape unscathed, disappearing into the bush before the soldiers could confirm their kill. As the days turned into weeks, the Army found themselves in a stalemate with the emus. Despite their best efforts, their mission to control the emu population was proving to be far more difficult than they had initially anticipated. It was clear that this was not just a simple pest control operation. This was a war. And the emus? Well, Despite their best efforts, the emus proved to be formidable opponents. The war was far from over as the emus continued their rampage. Despite the initial optimism, the Australian army was finding themselves outmaneuvered and outlasted by the resilient emus. The birds, seemingly impervious to the army's tactics, continued to ravage the farmlands, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The public's reaction was one of mixed sentiments. While some found the situation amusing, viewing it as a humorous episode of nature trumping man's best-laid plans, others were less amused. They were the farmers whose livelihoods were being torn apart quite literally by these feathery invaders. They viewed the army's efforts as insufficient and demanded stronger action. Meanwhile, the army was grappling with their own set of challenges. Their initial strategy of using machine guns to cull the emu population was proving ineffective. The emus, with their surprising speed and unpredictability, were difficult targets, and their sheer numbers compounded the problem. It was like trying to hold back a tide with a sieve. In response, the army attempted to adapt their tactics. They tried ambushes, they attempted to corral the emus into smaller areas, they even tried mounting machine guns on trucks for greater mobility. Yet each strategy met with limited success. The emus, it seemed, were always one step ahead. Amidst the escalating tensions, public scrutiny intensified. The press began to question the government's decision to wage war on birds. Was it ethical? Was it practical? Was it even winnable? The government, under pressure, began to waver. The Great Emu War had turned into a spectacle, a farcical display of man's struggle against nature. The emus, oblivious to the political storm they had stirred, continued their path of destruction unabated. The government, caught in the crossfire of public opinion and a relentless enemy, was left with no choice. In the face of public scrutiny and relentless emus, the government was forced to reconsider its approach. In an unexpected turn of events, the war was called off. The Australian government, having seen the futility of their efforts, decided it was time to cease fire. They had tried various strategies, from employing more soldiers to using different types of weaponry, but to no avail. The emus, in their own unique way, had proven to be a formidable force. In the aftermath, the government was left to deal with the criticism and mockery that followed their unconventional war. Their final strategy was not one of battle, but of diplomacy and adaptation. They introduced measures to control the emu population, which included providing farmers with ammunition and rewards for hunting the birds. The end of the war did not mean the end of the emu problem, though. The birds continued to roam the lands, a constant reminder of the war that had been fought and lost. Thus, the Great Emu War ended, leaving behind a tale of resilience and survival. Looking back, the Great Emu War is a testament to the unpredictability of nature. It underscores the importance of understanding and respecting our environment and its inhabitants. This bizarre chapter in history demonstrates how even the most seemingly absurd situations can have far-reaching implications. This war wasn't about power or territory, but rather about coexistence, survival, and resource management. It provides a unique perspective on the intricate balance between humans and nature. When this balance is upset, the consequences can be as unexpected as a war against birds. The Great Emu War also serves as a reminder that history is often stranger than fiction. It's a narrative filled with surprises, ironies, and lessons to be learned. It's a story that prompts us to reflect on our relationship with the world around us and to consider how our actions can impact this delicate balance. The Great Emu War, a fascinating chapter in history where Australia found itself in a war against birds,